Hello, welcome to another Civ 6 Guides, Tips, and Tricks video. This time we're going to be looking at making a tier list of all the civs, and we're going to be looking at how they fare in this current Better Balanced Game patch, and then how this is going to change based on the update that's going to come out tomorrow. So I want to go through each civ, tell you where I feel like they fall on a tier list, why they do, and then you'll probably have a better understanding of how civs sort of end up being strong or weak comparatively. So let's get started by looking at Germany. So Germany, I'd say, is pretty average. They don't have a start bias. It takes them a while to get going. But when they do get going, they're pretty good. The Hansa is really strong. It's really cheap. You get a lot of nice bonuses out of that, but you really want a lot of snowball, and it takes them a while to get going. So that's why I would put them in an average spot. Wilhelmina, I'd say, is pretty strong right now. She gets a science boost for her campuses, and her production boost for her industrials. She can set up like dams or canals to make really strong industrials on the rivers or aqueducts. Her special frigate is really strong if you need to go naval or just protect your coastals in the mid game. In general, she's just a good, strong simming civ, which is really important when there's more of a defensive style of play. I'd say Alexander is probably pretty average. He has a really strong early game with 2 unique units. He can utilize Great Generals really well with the Heteroi. And if he's able to take one of your cities, he gets a huge production boost. He gets 20% more production for 10 turns, which can then start snowballing him. So if he can get going early, he's a really great pick. But if he doesn't get going, then he starts to lose a lot of that momentum. Chandra Gupta, I'd say he's kind of weak. His really only defining bonus of importance is the +1 movement for military units. It's useful for siege units because that means they can move and shoot for all of Chandra Gupta's units. But besides that, I guess the Varu is okay. But then again, it's a very expensive unit. It comes at horseback riding, so it's not a super early rush, and it takes a lot of hammers to get going. And then once he's past that point, there's not a huge amount of reason to pick him over other war civs, which is why I would put him as a weak civ. China, I'd say, is pretty average. The extra builder charge is really strong on them, and being able to complete early wonders is really strong. So in general, they're a pretty average simming civ, but it's like close between them being a strong civ and an average civ. They can do culture victory really well because you can get a lot of the early wonders that are useful, like Apadana, efficiently. And wonders provide a lot of tourism on this patch, so comparatively to other sources you can get. So he's pretty good. Maybe I'll consider him as strong when I'm done. Gorgo and wherever Pericles are both strong civs. They do culture really well. The Acropolis has great adjacencies for not having to have wonders. You can have wonders, but you don't need them. They get essentially a free suzerain of any city-state they want because of the amount of envoys they can get. They get a free wildcard policy. Pericles gets extra culture from city-states, which can really help because it's a percent multiplier. So when he gets a lot of culture and he has like 2 or 3 suzerains, maybe you suzerain a couple cheap ones, he can be really strong right there. Gorgo Her culture killing ability is not as good as Pericles' passive, but they're both pretty similar level of power. And being able to generate that much culture when there's not a lot of other good ways to do it right now, I think that's pretty strong. Rome, I'd say, is very strong. There's pretty much a very few ways to have a bad game on Rome. You start with a free monument, which really helps you snowball the early game, and the Legion is a pretty era-defining unit. You can destroy people with it, especially if you get a great general. You can almost have like a 10 combat bonus over the opponent. And I'd say that later on in the game you can use baths with industrial hubs to generate lots of culture, amenities, housing, and production. So he really fits in really well with that new change to the industrial hub, the industrial zone. So if you need to go early war, he's good. If you need to sim, he's good. So that's why I would say he's pretty strong, because he has both war bonuses and sim bonuses. I'd say Montezuma is pretty average. There are some games on Montezuma where you get multiple continents that you're nearby early, and you can pick up a lot of luxuries. But in general, you want combat bonuses to come into the game as early as possible, and you don't want to have them come in later, if at all possible. So the fact that Montezuma starts with no combat bonuses besides the Eagle Warrior makes it a little hard and slow to start off in a lot of games you'll get with him. Yeah, he does become a powerhouse and pretty much unstoppable if you can get like 3 continents worth of luxuries, because he gets 1 attack bonus for every luxury, but it doesn't work on defense, so he's still vulnerable to ranged units for the most part. So I would put him as like an average war civ. He doesn't have a lot of sim potential except for late game with spaceports, so he can use his builder charges to do 15% of the production of a spaceport, so that can really boost you up. You can pretty much get all cities in Aztec land to have spaceports. But besides that, he doesn't have many other sim abilities. The Eagle Warrior is pretty good for farming a couple early builders, but then again, that's also sort of random, just when you can get that. Sometimes you don't have opportunities for that, but other times you do. So, sort of a variable bonus. And once it gets past that point, the Eagle Warriors, once you get to classical units, the Eagle Warrior is sort of obsoleted besides that purpose. And in the early game, it takes a lot more production than the Warrior, so sometimes it's actually sort of a bane if you're trying to get going early. So that's why I'd put him as average. Khmer is meta-defining. They can generate insane amounts of faith really quickly, no matter where they are on this patch. They have a special siege unit, and siege units are very broken. So they can get a ton of builders and free settlers, and then once they have that, they can also come and kill you basically for free. So pretty much very hard to mess up as Khmer. You get a free culture bomb off your holy district that also gets 2 adjacency from rivers. So sometimes you don't even need a pantheon based around your holy site, but it does help. Sacred Path is really good, or River Goddess. Inca meta-defining because their special skirmisher is extremely broken if you get 3 promotions on it, which gives it plus 20 combat strength. It can basically kill players for free. That coupled with the fact they have a great bias in mountains, their terrace farms are amazing. Just a great, insane civ, completely broken. I'd say Teddy is meta-defining. He gets plus 5 defense and offense on all his units on his own continent. That gives him pretty much complete safety in a lot of situations. And if you want to kill someone who's on your continent, you basically have the free will to do that. There's really nothing that can stop you if you know what you're doing and play it out right. On top of that, you also have an ability that gives you extra diplomatic favor in Congress, which allows you to control Congress more effectively. You get a conversion of your diplomatic slots into wildcards, which is extremely beneficial because diplomatic card slots are um, they're not worth a lot, and wildcard slots can be worth way more because you can use them on economic slots like the campus adjacency, settlers, builders, whatever you need. Teddy gets an extra one. And then late game, if you go for culture victory, his special film studio doubles your tourism against people in the modern age. So it's really hard to stop him on a culture victory. It's hard to stop him on a domination victory if he starts taking over people on his continent, and then he can transition really into whatever he wants. So it's pretty difficult to stop him. That's why he's meta defining. Hungary, an average civ. I'd say their bonus is really hard to get to work out because you need for their districts, the Pearl of Danube. You need the district to be directly across a river from your city center, and a lot of the times that just isn't where you want your district. The most beneficial ones are probably the commercial hub and industrial zone, but even then, it's not super great as a simming bonus. The other two bonuses, the other two units they have, the Hussar, really strong cavalry, but comes in a little late to be super effective, but it is a strong unit, has extra strength, and then the amount of alliances you have gives it additional strength. In Diplo Plus, it's a lot weaker. I'd say he's probably a weak civ in Diplo Plus, an average civ in a game where you can have as many alliances as you want, like a teamer game. But that sort of puts it at like an average state for me. The Black Army pretty much never gets used. It's really hard to use because you need the Black Army to be near levied units, and it was nerfed in the Better Balanced game to not get as much of a bonus when you complete those requirements. So he's not that strong for the Black Army. And then you're going to have the levy bonus, which is kind of cheesy. It doesn't really help you a lot of the time. It's more useful in a team game format where you have a lot of extra gold to utilize and sort of hit people in the back, but I think in a free-for-all, it's a lot less useful. I think Nubia is meta-defining. They have an incredible sim bonus in the Nubian Pyramid and their base ability, which gives them 20% bonus towards districts. And with a Nubian Pyramid next to the city center, they get 40% towards all districts. So they can build pretty much every district in the game at a significantly cheaper price. The Nubian Pyramid itself gives incredible yields in the Better Balanced game mod. And they also get a bonus towards building ranged units and ranged experience, plus a unique archer with an extra movement and a little extra strength. So they're really safe in the early game, and they're then able to set up with this really great simming bonus. A lot of people say that it's like sometimes random. If you get grasslands, it's hard with Nubia, but grasslands is a great spawn anyway because you can still set up with your 20% bonus towards districts. You can use your archers more to bully out land. I'd say they're a pretty meta-defining civ. Maori, I'd say is a very strong civ. A lot of the time you can find little coves and stuff in the early game to set up with. They're just sort of passive ability of getting one extra production on all like woods and rainforest tiles makes them really strong in the early game because you don't need builders. And then their special theater district building gives them an additional faith and culture on all of those tiles that are unimproved with features. So he's pretty. If Maori is on the map, it's pretty hard to go naval because they're just sort of everywhere. So they can kind of completely dominate the ocean with very little effort. On top of that, the toas that they get at construction are really strong at being able to bully out more land, so you can go sort of further inland if you want to as well. And they're sort of key at winning like early wars. You can use them to get up front and then get a line of crossbows or archers behind and be able to sort of bully out more land. And that's why I'd sort of say they're very strong. You can get some really crazy spawns with them. But I think they're a little bit more difficult than a lot of other civs. But once you sort of master the art of understanding what's worth it to settle in the early game and when it's worth to move a few more turns, you can really get the power out of Maori. Poland, pretty average. I'd say they're sort of kept away from being very weak because if you get a couple relics early game and then you get reliquaries, you can get some pretty early culture victory cheese, or you can get just a ton of faith, and that can propel you early game. But the guaranteed 2 relics you have is not going to be game-changing amounts of faith that you can generate. You have to sort of get lucky with city-states like Kandy, or just finding relics in huts. They're a little bit better in teamers because you have more chances at relics, but it's never a sure thing with them. The Winged Hussar is a pretty good unit, but it's just sort of odd because you can't upgrade into it. And eventually, once muskets come out, the Winged Hussar is just sort of a mobile musket that's a little less strong. So I'd say that's basically most of their abilities. So I'd put them as like an average. Gandhi is really weak. He's basically Chandra Gupta, except without Chandra Gupta's +1 combat movement. The extra movement on workers and settlers is not that useful. So that's where I'd put him. It's a pretty close comparison. Mali is meta defining. They make way too much gold. If you find a desert spawn with them, they're absolutely insane. If you don't have a desert spawn with them, they have a half cost off commercial hub that then you can transition into campuses and make a ton of money while also just doing sort of normal sim behaviors. And then that allows you to just sort of build up huge armies that you can then kill people with, or buy out buildings that usually would take a while and focus your efforts on other things. So it's pretty hard to stop them once they get going. If you stop them in the early game, you're probably destroying your own game because they can probably just fund a lot of units. And while they might not win the game, you're probably not going to win the game either. Georgia, sort of hard to say. I'd say they're strong because they get a lot of faith off of the walls at the moment. If you can get a lot of walls out, they have a great monumentality in the early game, and it's not a lot of pressure to get it. The one key thing is you have to hit the first golden with Georgia. If you don't, then you're sort of missing out on the ability to pick a dedication while in a golden age, and your walls provide half the amount of faith that they normally would. So that's sort of a key part to them. Pretty much all the other stuff is not super important. Being able to control city-states with papal primacy can be good, but that requires some investment towards, and the special swordsman they have is not super crazy. It gets a bonus on hills, but that's about it. I don't know, I'd say it's either average or strong. I'll see. Gilgamesh is just completely awful. I really see literally no reason to pick him His war cart has been nerfed into utter oblivion to the point where it can't do anything that it's supposed to do. His ziggurat provides like a little bit of science on one culture, but it can only be built on flat land, so you're getting it on the absolute worst type of tile you want. Um, his shared experience is okay, but it requires like too many variables to be in play and set up perfectly that it just a lot of the times it ends up not like being used at all. And then that's really all he has. Early game he gets tribal village rewards out of barbarian hut or barbarian camps, but you're probably going to clear maybe 3 or 4 at most. It's not huge. You're maybe getting like at best like a free worker to a population and an envoy. Um, and that's like at best case scenario. You might even just get like boosts like sailing or astrology, and that's why I'd say there's like no reason to pick him. I think Scotland is weak. They are all tied around their amenities, and even then their ability is not that strong. It's like 5% at happy, 5% production and science at happy level of amenities, and 10% at ecstatic, which means that at when you are doing your absolute best to maximize their abilities, you're getting like maybe 20 science in the mid game, a little bit, maybe like 4 production per city. It's really marginal. Doesn't do that much for you. His golf course does provide some good yields, and it does provide an amenity, which does help towards his other ability, but his Highlander is useless, and his special war declaration is completely useless as well. So if you're in free sim with him, he's fine. But if you're in any other position where you need to war, you're going to lose amenities, you start to lose all your bonuses, and then you're just a vanilla civ. So that's why I'd say he's pretty weak. Cleopatra is strong. I've been playing her a lot recently. I find that she gets... when you get spawns that are in floodplains, you can set up really good tiles in the early game with the floodplain pantheon and your sphinxes to provide you a lot of faith and culture, and it really boosts you ahead quickly. The also ability to get 25% production towards wonders and districts on rivers pretty much automatically makes it better than Hungary, because it doesn't have the requirement of being across a river from a city center. It's just on any river, so she can set up much more freely in these rivers. And on top of that, she doesn't get affected by floods. So when you set up on floodplains, you get an additional food in your city, and then when the city gets flooded, it gets even more yields on the city center and all the tiles around it. So you're just going to end up with some pretty good tiles. You get a good production bonus, a good simming bonus, a good monumentality, just a very overall strong civ. And the Marianu Chariot Archer can be extremely powerful. It has almost the strength of a crossbow and 4 movement. So you can really bully people in the early game with that. Though it is a pretty big investment, so build a few of them and then sort of try to sim behind it if you're trying to bully out people. France. Tended to say that they're very strong or strong, but I'm going to say that they're just strong for now. France, with the +3, with the extra intel, they get +3 on all opponents. It's a pretty strong ability because it works everywhere. But it's not so strong that you really can't break apart French units. It's just a little bit harder to take them out. Their extra spy, getting like a free promotion, basically, working as a level higher. really helps them out, especially once you hit the mid game, because you get a free spy at castles, which means you're going to have a spy before anyone else. And if you can level up that spy one time, you can then get two extra levels of diplomatic visibility on top of the one you already have, which gets you 3. So it gives you the highest level of access into that civ, as well as having +9 in combat if they don't have a spy on you. So that can be really, really strong. But besides that, the chateau is pretty unreliable. It's a good improvement on rivers, but it requires too many things. 100% tourism from wonders can be good, but they don't have any other benefits to synergize with that, so it's not as good. Australia is a very strong civ. They can completely take over in terms of sim, because of how breathtaking appeal works. Mountains, if you have a chain of mountains that creates like a +4 campus, you're already getting like a +7 campus with the +3 to breathtaking. With the update that allowed lumber mills to be placed a lot earlier and provide better yields, you can preserve your good appeal tiles for a lot longer and actually just set up really nice spots for your districts without sacrificing production. When he has a really good simming bonus, and then he also has a really good military unit in the digger. If you can get to the digger pretty quickly, which is not hard with his science and his other simming bonuses, you can get basically a super infantry that is almost impossible to kill for any player at the time it comes. And you can take over people, which then means you're getting even more benefit. So you're having a really strong simming empire, and then you can take over a player. So that's strong. Along with the fact that they have that sort of cheese ability of being able, if they liberate a city, they get 100% production in all their cities for 10 turns. And that's huge. It can be game winning because you get so much production that every city is just pumping out whatever you need. You can get 1,000,000 builders, you can get all your science district buildings, you can set up districts in every city, even the terrible ones. So it's a crazy ability. I love it. Sulaiman, pretty weak. He's a war civ that has all his war bonuses come in kind of later. He does get a bonus towards building siege units, which are very strong on this patch, but it's sort of like overkill. You have a 100% card, and then you get a 50% bonus towards them. So when you're changing like one turn to build one into one turn, it doesn't really do a lot for you. The Janissary is a pretty pivotal unit. It's really strong. It comes with a free promotion. But usually it's something you want to upgrade into because it costs a population otherwise. So his mid-game pushes are really strong, but it takes a while to get there, which makes it hard to snowball with him because he doesn't have any other bonuses to really help him sim up to that point. So that's why I would put him in a weak category. Japan, I'd put them as very strong. I think they're kind of boring to play because really it's just like playing a normal civ, but you're setting up your districts to all be next to each other for their adjacencies, but they're very consistent. They're always consistently strong. They get holy sites, theaters, and encampments half off. So if you go a religious Japan, which I don't see a lot of, but I think it's a really strong option, you get a lot of faith, and you can do basically some of the things that the top religious civs like Khmer do, but just a little bit worse, because you have that half off holy site. Your science districts are always going to be in the +3 range for rationalism. The only real weakness is the commercial hub not getting river adjacencies, but that's not too big of an issue when all your other districts are just powerhouses. You could put your commercial hub in the middle somewhere and just get a pretty decent adjacency. Samurai isn't that useful, but that one ability of +1 adjacency next to other districts, pretty much single-handed, and the half-off districts single-handedly take Japan into a very strong state. Korea, I'd say they're strong. It's really easy to focus on way too much science on them and forget your culture. Their Seowon is a really strong district. It's a half-off campus, but there are sort of times when you would rather have a normal campus than a Seowon. If you get into a mountain spot where you're safe, you're usually having bad Seowons because you'll only have like 1 or 2 hills maybe next to them and then a lot of mountains, and you're sort of sacrificing that district because you'll need a campus district, but there's just not a lot of good spots for your Seowon. It also takes away from the adjacency of other districts, so you're going to want to put other districts away from a Seowon, but other districts get benefits from being next to other districts. So you're sort of at a conundrum there, and it makes some of your later game decision making hard, and so I would say that they're kind of a strong civ. They can get a lot of early science, but sometimes it's hard to transition them. The Hwatch is a really strong unit, but with bombards and stuff running rampant in this patch, I would say they're strong. Congo, pretty weak. Almost, I'd say I'd put them as very weak. With all the nerfs to book values in the early game, I think that you don't get as much benefit if you go for culture as Congo as you used to in the early game. They're still really good for culture victory in the later game because you can get music and such in their capital and switch out those books. But in the early game, 2 culture and 2 tourism per book in your capital, it really slows down the sort of culture sim of Congo. They do get extra points for their theater squares and commercial hubs, but I think that's kind of a minor bonus. The theater square one is probably the most important, but besides that, not too much importance. Their special swordsman is super defensive, and really with the unique units you want, units that can push an advantage. Shaka is completely awful. The update that made upgrade costs even higher completely screwed over Shaka, because you used to want to pre-build a lot of core like things like heavy chariots or core archers and then upgrade them, but now it's really hard to get enough funds to upgrade that way, and that's really his only war benefit. His Akanda, you're probably going to build 1 or 2 of them. It has a pretty minor benefit of 1 housing, and then once you get core units, you can just build them outright in those cities, which is good, but it's still going to be a lot more production, and you're basically putting that production into making your ability actually work. And besides that, they'd have nothing. You get extra loyalty when garrisoning a unit, which is not really that great at all. It requires that you're already killing someone, and if you're killing someone, you're probably going to keep taking cities, and then loyalty's not going to be as big an issue. It really only helps if you're like fighting into someone with huge cities that are just destroying your loyalty, and even then it's probably not going to help. It's probably going to save like 1 or 2 turns. Not that great. Completely awful. Russia, very strong civ, very reliant on getting Tundra to get the extremely good status that would make him meta-defining. If he always got Tundra, he'd be meta-defining. Right now, I just think he's very strong. When he does get the Tundra, and a lot of it, you can take over a game really quickly on Peter. But otherwise, it just takes... When you have normal land, his Holy Site isn't as good. His Cossacks are kind of weak compared to other unique units. Generally, Generally, it's good to pick him if you can, but he is kind of a little bit coin flip if you get those spawns. Mongolia. Mongolia's average. I'd say that the Keshig is not that great of a unit. It does... His bonus for +3 on all mounted units is good, but that comes in... I think it's more impactful in the later parts of the game, so I wouldn't count on it too much being a big benefactor, because oligarchy works as well to give you +4, so you can counter him fairly easily. The biggest benefit to Genghis Khan is his extra... He gets double diplomatic visibility. So if you get 1 level, you get 2. And if you get 2 levels, you get 4. So if you can get an upgraded spy and put it in someone's lands, you can just rip them to shreds. Or if you get to printing first, you can rip them to shreds. Cyrus, completely awful. Pretty much none of his abilities are that useful. Yeah, just nothing useful about him right now. Canada, I think, is pretty weak. I think it's really... everything is reliant on the tundra. So, if you don't get tundra, this civ is worthless. If you do get tundra, it's kind of a slow start. And then once you get it rolling, he's pretty strong. But that's just way too inconsistent to have everything based around where you spawn. His national parks and mounties, yeah, that can get you some culture victories if you're in the tundra, but then again, that's the coin flip. So, Poundmaker, very strong. Actually, I'm gonna put him as strong. He can definitely... He gets a lot of bonuses early. His Cree scouts can take over city-states for free. He gets a free trade route at Pottery, which is huge, and a tile grab with the trade routes. So I would say that that's alone is huge. Plus his Mecha Wop gives him a full housing, which is huge. And it's also really... It scales really well with a lot of technologies. If you set it up near a lot of bonus resources or luxuries, you're making a ton of money just for being Cree. His internal trade routes and external trade routes are good as well, so that feeds into the extra ability of him having an additional trade route. It's pretty hard to get a bad spawn as the Cree, so that's why I would say they're strong. Eleanor of France is average, I would say, only because you can do some really cheesy culture victories with her. If you get a lot of wonders in the early game, she gets double tourism, just like Catherine, off of wonders, which means that she can gather a lot of tourism in the early game that can be unanswered for, because culture is sort of harder to come by than science. Additionally, she gets 100% production towards theater square buildings, which means that she has 2 abilities that synergize well for culture victory. But the rest of her kit is completely worthless. The Garde Imperiale, not that good. Takes way too many hammers to build. It gets obsoleted by tanks pretty much immediately. And her sort of loyalty ability, really, really niche. Sometimes it works, but a lot of the times you're just like taking over someone's city with loyalty, and then they take it right back and they're pissed off at you. So that's why I would say they're average. So we have Eleanor of England, who I would say is average, and Victoria is strong. So Victoria is basically the better than the Eleanor of France. She gets free naval units out of her dockyards. This one doesn't. She gets redcoats. This one doesn't. This one only gets the niche loyalty bonus that I already previously stated is not that great. They both do get the Workshop of the World, which is an amazing ability that gives you a lot of late game sim potential. Um, and that's why I'd say Victoria is really strong. She gets her powered buildings basically make 4 of an additional yield of whatever it is, so your research labs are huge, and then that actually gets amplified by rationalism card. So she can make ridiculous amounts of science late game. And her factories produce a lot more production for her cities. She gets online at industrialization. Brazil's a strong civ. The Miniscaris, a game-defining unit in the modern era, because it's a battleship you're going to get to before pretty much anyone can get to battleships. You can go industrialization in the tech tree and then go for Minis in the culture tree and completely take over the seas at that point in the game. You don't even need to be naval at any point before it. His bonus of getting jungle tiles, giving adjacencies for his campuses and commercials and theaters and holy sites, all that stuff, a great bonus. A lot of times jungle is a really good starting location, and you can get really high adjacencies really early. His magnanimous ability, where he gets great people back, not that useful, but still a nice little perk. It's not bad. But you can get some really good sim with Brazil. Guitarja, Indonesia. She's pretty average. Naval civs generally are not super strong. Victoria and Maori sort of being the exception, because Maori can kind of just terraform the world, and Victoria gets online at industrialization, but Indonesia sort of falls flat because the Jong is not super strong anymore. Now that it requires Niter, it means that you can't just rush it in the culture tree and then produce a ton of them. You are now forced to go through all the way to military engineering, and then you can't even get a lot of them out. So it kind of kills a lot of the uniqueness of that unit. Getting 2 faith for being on the coast is not huge. The only benefit is that you get an early religion, or early pantheon, excuse me, and that allows you to get any pantheon you want. A lot of the times I pick religious settlements with her. You get a free settler. You can get going early. But that's about it with her. She doesn't have a lot going for her. The adjacencies next to the coast are nice, but then usually those spots get wiped out in the late game. And you can only really get a max of like 2 adjacency, which is not enough for rationalism on its own. So it's a little bit tough. Mapuche, I put them as strong. They get +5 against civs in a golden age. A lot of the time the first age is golden, pretty much most players, I would say. So that's a +5 everywhere. That's huge. But it doesn't come in until turn 30. So he can't early rush you, but he can do a little bit of a delayed rush. His Malon Rider is okay. It doesn't have any combat bonuses, but it is faster, and it also can pillage for 1 movement instead of 3. So that's a pretty nice bonus. His Chemamul is pretty hard to use, but it is good when you get it. And it requires breathtaking tile, and it gets you a lot of culture and 2 production, 1 in base, 1 in civil service. Sweden, average. Actually, I sort of say they're weak. They're really reliant on getting a few wonders for all of their abilities to work in the early game. You need things like Apadana to get going, and even then, once you do get Apadana, you have to wait until you can get things like Art or music to theme it properly. Now that the books are nerfed, their bonus that they get doubled yields from theming, or they get like free theming in their wonders. Doesn't really help them that much anymore in the early game. If you can get a lot of wonders and you can get yourself rolling in that sense, then yeah, they can work out pretty well. Their open air museum is something that can provide a lot of extra tourism, especially if you go big and cover up all the different types of land. But I'd say they're pretty inconsistent. If they get disrupted, their culture kind of goes downhill pretty quickly. Dido. I'd say that Dido is a strong civ. She can get, just like England, they can sim really well. Dido, on the other hand, gets bonuses to settlers, which is a nice bonus. Their Byreme is not that great because it's just a galley. The best you're going to get out of it is cheesing someone out of an early city, but you're probably not doing a lot of galley battling. Not a lot else for them, but getting Kothans, giving you the 50% towards naval and settlers is really great, and then the government building giving you extra trade routes helps a whole ton. Just need to do some. Yeah. No. Other. Yeah. Sathya. They're say strong. I'd say Sathya is completely based around killing your opponent, and they don't have really anything else to fall back on. They have no simming bonus. Their Kurgan is pretty reliant on a lot of RNG in your pastures. Everything is sort of stacked around this early game advantage of +5 against attack against wounded, and your ability to mass spam Shaka or Searchers to sort of bully your opponent. You're really, really reliant on getting a great general, because if you don't, the Shaka Horse Archers are not as effective, and your early game push into someone is probably not going to work out as well. With Garrison Commander, you can probably defend against them pretty easily, and if you get a general yourself and classical units on a line, Sathya is probably not breaking through you unless they just sort of Arel themselves, and at that point, other civs have sort of passed by them. If you have people in like a team game that can fund you, it's definitely a little bit better, and aggression in a game where you know you're going to have more aggression, sort of war civs sort of go up in priority, but I'd say that they're just sort of a strong civ at the moment. Spain, awful. Like, none of their abilities synergize very well. Conquistadors are a super cheesy unit that requires missionaries to be on the same tile, so it's sort of hard to, like, at the same time set up missionaries and muskets, and then that's really all it is. Once muskets get obsoleted, so do the conquistadors. They get sort of blown apart by field cannons, and that's about it for them. Fleets, actually, early fleets is not a good ability. My cat just wants to eat everything. So yeah. Herald, completely awful. For a lot of naval civs, sort of your goal is to do free inquiry, because you can get a lot of harbors out with them early and dominate the seas, and that's sort of your plan. You can do a lot of other stuff to start off, but harbors is probably one of your earliest builds because you want to conquer the oceans. Herald's ability, Herald's a unique unit. The longship can dominate early, but then again, early a galley unit, you can sort of defend against that. It's not ridiculous. Um, and Dido has the same thing, but she has a better simming ability. Herald gets holy site adjacency for being next to the coast, which is sort of a beginner's trap, if I would say. Because even though it does synergize with his harbor now in the mod, so that you have you get additional harbor adjacency for adjacent holy sites. You're then basically saying that my first two districts are going to be a holy site and a harbor, and I'm going to have no science and no culture, and I'm going to go monumentality because I went holy sites. So there's just too much disconnect between his abilities. His berserkers are useless. Yeah. Saladin, I'd say, is weak. Mostly for the fact that he's hard to play because he requires you to do very specific things right. He's basically a religious science-based civ. So that means you're going to be going religion and science and then commercial hubs for a large portion of the time, because his ability dictates that you get your third tier religious building in all your cities to increase your science. Once he does get online, if he can, he is really strong, but he also doesn't have anything he's sort of building up to. He's just sort of getting a lot of science for the point of getting a lot of science. He can generate a lot of faith, but I find he's sort of a hard... When I see a lot of people play it, they either mess it up, or it's just not very effective. Some players can really take advantage of the fact that he goes holy sites and campuses, because you can go monasticism in the Second Age, and that'll get you up to super high amounts of science because it gives you 75% boost in cities with a holy site for your science. But that means you're tanking your culture, and you're probably having a terrible income. So I'd say he's pretty difficult to play, but when he does get that sort of optimal setup, he's really good. But for now, I'm just going to put him as a weak civ. Okay. So now I want to talk about sort of where this all changes as the new patch comes out. So in the new patch, we're going to look at some of the things that were changed to sort of some of these meta-defining picks. Khmer got their 100% towards holy sites removed, and they also got the Domri reverted back to its original state as a sort of mid-tier siege unit at military engineering. So it's in between the catapult and the bombard as a unique unit. I'm going to put them as weak. I think this nerf is really hits home at what made them broken, but now they're also just very underwhelming, I think, is what's going to happen. Basically, a lot of what you want in a faith civ is a civ that can very quickly accumulate large sums of faith for a monumentality. Now, sort of the first thing you always want to do on Khmer is build a holy site in your new cities. So on the old patch, it'd probably be like a 6 or 7 turn holy site. This new patch, it's probably going to be like a 14 turn affair. It's not going to be really quick. You're still going to get all the old bonuses you would have gotten out of it, but with the slower speed, it means that when you're building new cities, you can't just freely get another holy site that then gives you more builders and more settlers and just goes out of control. The Domri is going to be completely useless, in my opinion. They are nerfing siege units on the left side of the tree to only work against units. So the Domri already has a limited use, and it's not even going to be able to take use of sort of being like a extremely powerful front tank unit that can take down cities really easily. So I'm going to say they're weak. I don't think they should really be played that much. Their Aqueduct 100% bonus is still there, but that's not really the important part. When you take away the key ability of what makes something important, like valuable, just completely without being like a 50% or 25 or whatever, I think it just moves it all the way down to weak. Inca got changed. The Warhawk, whatever it's called, it got nerfed from being. It got basically its extra bonus strength that it usually has taken away. I think also the ambush promotion is 10. Actually, I think that's what it is. The ambush promotion is 10 instead of 20. And I think that makes them still a very strong sim-civ. You could still probably find some use in that special skirmisher, but it's not going to be like an insta-kill that sort of puts it in a meta-defining state. They're still going to have crazy terrace farms. You're still going to have crazy trade routes. You're still going to have awesome campuses because of your spawns, for the most part. Generally still going to be really strong. Nubia got some alterations. They no longer have a production bonus towards ranged units, but in addition, they can now place the Nubian pyramids on flat grasslands. And I think this makes them, honestly, I would say they're still meta-defining. The main part, I didn't really think that the 25% bonus towards units was a huge deal, but because there is a 50% card already, and so in general you're probably not losing out on a huge amount of production that you would have saved with that ability. You still have the ranged experience bonus, which is the more important one, because that lets them get up to things like level 2 field cannons, level 2 crossbows, double shot crossbow, double shot field cannon, that kind of stuff. That really makes or breaks a push or defense. And in addition, now they're much more consistently can get that 40% boost towards their districts, which is what makes them super strong. The Nubian Pyramid itself gives 2 food if it's next to a city center, 2 faith at base, and then it gets 2 of whatever yield of the district it's next to. So, like if it's next to an industrial, it'll get like 2 extra production. Next to a campus, you're getting 2 extra science. You can build these things literally everywhere now, and it's going to be crazy. So, I would say they're meta-defining. Still, Mali, they are going down into the dumpster, into average or weak, I'd say. I'd put them as weak. So now their mines, they're still the -1 production, but they only give 2 gold now, and the gold comes back into their kit at banking, 1 at banking and 1 at economics. So for a lot of the game, you're just gonna have like terrible production. You're not gonna have a lot of gold. 2 extra gold per mine is like nothing. There's like luxuries that could do better than that, and those luxuries would probably have better yields. And generally they got nothing back for it. So if you don't spawn in the desert, you're completely screwed. If you do spawn in the desert, you can probably do some kind of faith stuff and still make them work out. But now it's really reliant on the desert. If you have terrible desert, you're probably going to have a terrible time on Mali. Russia got a small nerf. Their Lavra makes only 1 great profit point instead of 2. so that's not going to really change where they end up. Um, and there's really nothing else that got changed or of significance. I think maybe you could say you can't really say Sweden moved. They moved the culture of books to 4, and the tourism stays at 2. So they could be a little bit stronger, but um, Sweden's really looking for the tourism. So the culture is nice, but you would rather have the tourism. Um, Gilgamesh got some changes. Um, he gets 3 influence points per turn if he's in a military alliance, which really doesn't do much. It gives you like 2 envoys every 25 turns, an extra 2 in sort of like the mid game. So you're probably going to get like 4 extra max than you would really slowly at points where it doesn't really matter. It's not super great as an ability. The war cart got altered so that it's still as useless. It's just a heavy chariot replacement that goes from 28 strength to 32, the war cart. But that's still, if you go for wheel immediately to get your war cart, you're going to get to your opponent. You're going to start building war carts, and you're going to get to your opponent, and he's going to get horsemen, and then he's just going to slaughter you. So I think he's still completely awful, unplayable. Anyway, so that's how sort of the tier list, I think, pans out. I think the only thing I would say maybe I would change is like Maori as a strong civ, just because they're a little bit more coin flippy, but they're still pretty consistently good wherever they land. I think strong is actually a good spot for them. But thank you for watching. If you have any questions about where you think something would go, if you think something would go in a different spot, let me know in the comments. Or take it to the general chat of CPL, which will be in the description. It's a Civ playing league for competitive multiplayer. Have a good day. Bye.